Morning, everyone. Welcome wherever you are in the world. I'm Dr. Patricia Northover, a Senior Research Fellow at the SES Institute at University of West Indies, MONA, and I'm your host today and moderator for this very special event. I wish to thank you all for joining us for this virtual launch of the Social and Economic Studies Journal, Volume 73, Numbers 1 and 2, 2024. This event will be live streamed by the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation located in Barbados on its YouTube channel. We're very happy for their support. This event will also be recorded and will be available on our SES social media platforms, SES MONA Facebook and YouTube. Our gathering here would not have been possible without the wonderful academic contributors of our presenters today, who will speak for 5 minutes on their articles in this SES volume. I'll provide a brief introduction of each presenter before they speak on their topics. But before, let me say a few words about this journal. We hope that you will find this new format for communicating our research being published in our flagship journal stimulating and insightful. Our journal, ably led by Ms. Mary Yanchai Swen, the journal's publication editor, and also the envisioner, brainchild, and organizational force behind this outreach event. This journal is 72 years old. It was founded in 1953, shortly after the university was founded in 1948, and is one of the longest running peer-reviewed journals in the Caribbean, dedicated to interdisciplinary research on the region's social, economic, cultural, and political development. It is hosted by the SES at MONA University campus and is published quarterly as a double-blind peer-reviewed journal. The SES, as we call it, is a multidisciplinary journal in nature, so it publishes as well book reviews on agricultural, anthropological, demographic, economic, educational, monetary, political, as well as sociological topics, with a view to analyzing and discussing problems of developing countries in the Caribbean, but also in Latin America. The journal is available via Gestor, JSTOR, ProQuest, and EBSCOhost databases. It is published online and is available in print versions. For today's discussion, we will have 9 presenters speaking to 7 articles. The time slot for each article review is 5 minutes. After the presentations, we will have approximately 10 minutes for Q&A. Then we'll wrap up with our final remarks. Please ensure that your mics are muted if you are not speaking, presenters. For the Q&A section, comments may be placed in the chat room, or you may use the raise your hand function at the bottom of the screen. I'd now like to turn to the main meat of the matter, which are our presentations. But before that, I'd like to make our introductions. So our first presenter will be Kaschka Watson, and he will be speaking on the topic Beyond Homophobia, a duoethnography of 2 Jamaican professors. The co-author is Dr. Andrew Campbell, who is an assistant professor in leadership for racial justice at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto, Canada. Our presenter today is Dr. Watson, and he is also an assistant professor in the Department of Education at Brock University, Canada, and his specialization is in administration, leadership, and policy. Their research interests span anti-racism, diversity, inclusion, LGBTQ issues, Black pedagogy and practice, as well as social justice in education. I'd like to turn the floor over now to Dr. Watson. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Patricia, and good morning, everyone. Good morning to the rest of our panelists. as well as to our audience in the room, in this virtual space. So, as Patricia mentioned, our article is entitled Beyond Homophobia, a Duoethnography of two Jamaican professors. And I will like to focus on the methodology of our article for today, given the time that we have. And the methodology section in the article has 3 parts. And I want to focus on the actual doing ethnography section, which I'm going to be talking about. So we chose Duoethnography as a qualitative methodological approach that really has extended its tentacles across the fields of social sciences, the humanities, as well as the healthcare profession. So this methodology involves a collaborative research method that really serves as a form of inquiry by juxtaposing the voices of 2 or more authors working together to really disrupt and untangle meanings about their experiences. So Dr. Campbell and I, we employed Duoethnography for this research article because it really provides us with the opportunity to engage in self-reflection and dialogue about our histories, as well as the stories that we share with each other. We participated in 4 critical dialogue meetings online over 4 months. We used Zoom as our platform. And during these times leading up to the scheduled meetings, we correspond with each other via WhatsApp, text messages, as well as over the phone, really sharing questions that would be addressed in our Zoom meetings. So in our Zoom meetings, those meetings typically last between 45 to an hour long. They are all audio recorded. And once we have completed each dialogical exchange, we transcribed and archived our conversation. And we do this really to revisit our conversations frequently, to really reflect on our discussions and the broad themes that emerge from our guiding questions that we use to stimulate our conversations. So as we reflected and examined these themes, and we looked at themes of friendship, we looked at themes of families, loss, hurt, trauma, abuse, and joy. And so as we're analyzing and grappling with those themes, we juxtapose them with our life histories. And so during this process, we really immersed ourselves in the analysis process through deep introspection. And we discovered through that process the value of our respective narratives, while we really challenged each other as we reflected on and reconceptualize our lived experiences as 2 gay men growing up in Jamaica, leaving Jamaica, and now living overseas and challenging systemic issues, not only for 2S LGBTQIA+ community, but also for other equity deserving or equity seeking groups as well. So during these moments of engagement, there were moments during the analysis process when we really challenged ourselves critically through reflection on certain assumptions and our personal experiences, which allowed us to really embrace vulnerability. And there were a moment during our dialogic conversation where both of us cried and break down in that session because the conversation really unearthed hurt that we thought we had dealt with given our experiences growing up in Jamaica. So that moment of vulnerability that we experienced was not only academic, but it was also therapeutic because it evokes elements of healing that we both appreciated. So this helped us to really challenge taken for granted assumptions in our narratives that are assumed as true. An essential process that is not found in the literature on duoethnography that we took the liberty to incorporate in this methodological approach is the approach that enables us to reread our dialogues verbatim. And so the purpose of rereading our dialogues word for word in an uninterrupted flow was for us to hear ourselves retelling our stories and engage in a form of member check-in, to see and to listen to what we had written. And so as we read our dialogues over and over, we simultaneously reflected and asked ourselves questions like, is this how I want to express what has been written? Is this how I want to articulate my memory? Is this exactly how I want to express particular points in my memory? Are there words I use that I should not have used? So these moments of grappling with these recollection, remembering and remembering the experiences of emotions really impacted us because we felt our journey through our stories. And this process of rereading also gave us the opportunity to engage in further reflexive processes where we stepped away from the work as authors and we imagine our readers and how we intend for them to receive the messages from our stories. So there are two other parts in our methodology where we talk about our doorship.
Thank you
When
so much, Dr. Watson.
Thank you.
That was a riveted review of the emotional journey that you and your co-author took, and we would love to further elaborate, but of course we have limited time.
Yes.
So I'd now like to introduce our second presenter. This will be Mariko Rooks and Michael Williams on the topic, Likkle but with Tallawah, Queering the Map in Jamaica. Mariko is a public health equity practitioner who specializes in developing and analyzing community solutions to oppression-driven health disparities for marginalized populations. Dr. Rooks holds a master's and bachelor's degree. Mariko Rooks holds a master's and bachelor's degree from Yale University. Michael is an independent scholar of Jamaican and Grenadian descent based in the United States. His interests center on human rights, immigration justice, and prison abolition. He has a BA and MSc from the University of Pennsylvania. Mariko and Michael, I'd now like to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much. So there's a dominant narrative that Jamaica is solely a site of abject homophobic, transphobic, and queerphobic violence, and that even earned the island the moniker the most homophobic place on earth in the 2000s from a US publication. And while violence and discrimination are a reality, there's much more to the LGBTQ plus Jamaican experience than just those aspects. So solely focusing on violence and discrimination as what it means to be an LGBTQ plus Jamaican erases decades of activism and advocacy by members of the community and the rich culture that they've fostered. So in the midst of violence, there also must be room in the narrative for hope, joy, futurity, and appreciation for the way that the community continues to live and thrive despite the threat of violence. So to interrogate this, we took a look at Queering the Map, which is a user-generated archive that anyone in the world can post on. And we found that the entries in Jamaica did include stories of discrimination, but they also included themes of place-based queer futurity, identity formation, community building, and relationship commemoration. So we believe this reflects the need for more archiving of stories that are specifically Jamaican and specifically LGBTQ plus, generated by LGBTQ plus Jamaicans themselves. So I'll pass it over to Mariko to talk a little bit more about our methods and results.
Thank you, Michael, for explaining all of the themes and the wonderful pieces of storytelling and of placemaking and person making that we found throughout this process. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the sort of nitty gritty of how we did this and when we did this. So we found that there were 27 total entries that were physically located on the island of Jamaica on Queering the Map, which is a sort of basic Mercator Western map where people can place an entry with any story or any text that they would like with very few limitations. And so we focused specifically on those that were physically put on the island of Jamaica. And what we did was that we knew that from previous analyses of Queering the Map that we expected to find certain themes within the archive. And so we had these deductive coding themes, and we also read through all the entries ourselves and developed more specific, often more place-based themes that we saw that were resonating throughout the text. So we had both inductive and deductive methodologies here. It is really important to acknowledge that, this is a very small sample size, and despite the rich stories that we found within, that there are some limitations to this as well. The site is dependent on having internet access, which around 70% of the island does not have consistently. And it's also often inversely proportional to population density. So we'll see a lot of entries in places like Kingston and Montego Bay, which also makes sense as hubs for the LGBTQIA+ community in general, but also it might be dangerous if you are in a rural community and there are only so many people who live there to be posting online like this. So we do want to acknowledge those limitations as well. That being said, we were able to still pull some of these really important themes, and we recognize too that within this larger analysis of Queering the Map as an important place of queer storytelling, that there has been very little research done on countries and places that are not within the global north. So places like Jamaica are not normally included in these kinds of analyses. So we were really honored to be able to add to the ongoing and nascent body of literature discussing this particular platform, but making sure that we were highlighting and showcasing these voices of folks that are not normally included in this kind of literature. So those were all of the sort of methods and approaches that we took in understanding this particular site and this particular medium, as well as some of the limitations inherent in working with this particular site. But we're really grateful to have the opportunity to read through and to honor these stories. And we'll go ahead and end it here. If you want to read more about what's in it, feel free to look at our article.
Thank you so much, Mariko and Michael, for helping us to understand that we need to go beyond the sense of Jamaica as simply a homophobic place, that there's much more to the island in terms of the experiences of the LGBT community, the hope, the joy, and the lives that are thriving despite the violence. So thank you so much for getting that information out through that online archive that will allow us to accommodate the experiences of voices in the global south. Our third presenter will be R. Anthony Lewis on the topic Neo-nativist disjunctures, historicizing evangelical anti-gay narratives of nation and belonging in the Caribbean and Africa. Dr. Lewis is an associate professor of language, culture, and society in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Technology. His research interests pivot around language, culture, society, and how these are shaped by creolization, Euro-nationalism, and discourses on sexuality. I'll turn it over to Dr. Anthony Lewis at this point.
Hi, good morning. Apologies for your not being able to see me, and I had a presentation prepared, but I'm having some technical challenges, so I'll just go straight ahead and get into the presentation without the being able to share. So the title, as you would note, is Neo-nativist disjunctures, historicizing evangelical anti-gay narratives of nation and belonging in the Caribbean and Africa. So it's a kind of comparative look at the narratives about, being Christian countries and a certain kind of nationalism that has emerged within the Caribbean and African spaces over the last few decades. Now, part of what I wanted to focus on, to drill down and look at, was how evangelicalism as a movement, what has been called the evangelical, Pentecostal, and charismatic movement, how that has come into the Caribbean and Africa from the United States and helped to not just construct, but to reconstruct certain other narratives that were locally based, and how it became domesticated within the space to then become the kind of leitmotif of a certain kind of anti-gay animus in the societies. So we would note that there has been, over the last several decades, a rapid spread of the EPCM, the Evangelical Pentecostal Charismatic Movement in the Caribbean and Africa. And this is rooted in the fact that the continent, Africa, and the region, the Caribbean, are satellites of the United States. And as part of the expansion of the culture of the United States as a global hegemon, the religion goes with it into these parts of the world. And so for the US, it becomes an export, but for us in Africa and the Caribbean, it becomes an import of the US styled what we call culture wars. I won't get into the definition of that. If you want, I can talk about that in the question and answer session. And then, of course, what that does, it promotes a certain kind of exclusionary notion of righteousness framed as national or indigenous. And then these issues become the central markers of determining whether the country is a moral or an upright country, and whether or not this so-called Christian country is living up to the values of righteousness. I want to just talk a little bit about the scholarly insight, because there are a number of people who have been looking at these issues from both regions, notably Kauma from Africa, and he speaks about the importance of the material culture of the United States being part of the attraction of young people into the evangelical, Protestant, and charismatic movement. Also, the concept of the prosperity gospel and how that has become a part of the cultures of various parts of the continent. Clearly, of course, this is a kind of overview, and because Africa is a diverse continent, very large, with multiple countries. And of course, the Caribbean, a similar thing has happened, but there is a specific nuance to how the work of these organizations has taken place. The first thing is to note that there is the displacement of older type religious groups. So the Anglicans, the Catholics, have typically been displaced in the narrative about nation by the EPCM, partly because these organizations have had a kind of distant relationship to certain local needs. One of them being the need for healing, for social services, needs that sometimes government would be expected to fulfill, but have not been able to fulfill in these parts of the world. But also the proximity of the church to the social needs of the individuals and their aspirational needs has given it a kind of edge over the traditional churches. Now, there is in Africa a certain other kind of nuance that's important. So the EPCM goes in between not just the traditional churches, but the traditional churches and what are also called African traditional churches. So at some point you would have had Christianity syncretizing with a number of African religions, and that becomes a part of what the Pentecostal movement, the EPCM, goes into Africa to kind of push aside. So it's not just the older churches that are associated with colonialism as part of the nativist or the nationalist narrative, but it's also the native Christian movements that are seen as backwards, and you don't want to have those as the representatives of Christianity within the domestic context. So these new churches are seen as modern. So it becomes a kind of battle between modernity and indigeneity, and a certain kind of modernity that wants to present itself as indigenous. And the issue that has become the leitmotif of this discussion is the anti-gay narrative within the spaces.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lewis,
that
for
was
your
5 minutes.
for your riveting contribution. Certainly highlighting the impact of U.S. cultural hegemony, generating forms of cultural wars through religion, indeed a fight for the soul of the Black folks. And we see here the paradoxical nature of religion in both uplifting and being a force for judgment. we see the displacement, as you've mentioned, between modernizing forces and indigenous religions that existed before. So thank you so much for that rich presentation, synopsis as it is. Our fourth presenter.
Thanks so much.
Our fourth presenter is Guillermo Gómez Aliaga, and he will speak to Grenada's fiscal system and its incidence. This is a multi-authored publication, with his co-authors being Gustavo Canavire-Bacarreza, please forgive me for mispronouncing, Chevanne Britton, Fernando Rios-Avila, Wilson Pozo, Silvia Ibarra, and Rand Lee. So Guillermo is a Bolivian who will be doing the presenting today, is a Bolivian economist specializing in applied econometrics and public policy. He studied economics at the University of Geneva and has worked with the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, and several other national institutions in Bolivia, as well as teaching across several universities. I now turn the floor over to Guillermo.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Let me know if you can see my screen, because I will be sharing the presentation of this document. So I will be presenting fiscal incidence on the island, Grenada's fiscal system and its incidence. What is the main objective of this document? It's evaluate Grenada's fiscal system and its incidence, determine who bears the burden of taxations and benefits from the social transfers. We're gonna answer, is fiscal policy in Grenada redistributive? And we're gonna describe the potential of fiscal policy to reduce poverty. Our hypothesis is Grenada's taxation and social programs can reduce poverty and inequality. Our main literature is based in 3 different works made in Jamaica, Barbados, and Dominican Republic. The methodology we use follows the Committed to Equity methodology developed by Lustig. Fiscal indice analysis refers to the process by which the state collects revenue through taxation and allocates this revenue to people to reduce poverty and inequality. The CQ framework constructs different income concepts in sequential stages. Our main data source is the Survey of Living Conditions and Household Budget in Grenada, as well as some administrative records of social programs and the characteristics of the tax system. This is what I mentioned before, different income concepts. We begin with the market income. The next is the net market income, disposable income, consumable income, and final income. In every single stage, we sum and rest some different fiscal incidences. For example, taxes, the child, school support and disability, or personal income with a rest is from the mark income. Okay, our results are gonna check briefly these results. In poverty, we see this is a decrease in poverty, starting from the market income to the consumable income. In the headcount poverty, we see to disposable income, we see a 3% diminution. Inequality, if we focus on Gini index, we see that the fiscal measures in Grenada are going to reduce the Gini index. If we concentrate our from market income to disposable income, we see like a 0.2 percentage points reduction. If we talk about is this the fiscal system in Grenada is pro-poor or against the poor, we see like the Kaukani index will answer this question, and we say that the transfers are pro-poor and the taxes are progressive. This meaning that are burdened more for the rich people in the high part of the income distribution. Some conclusions. The key findings are the fiscal interventions reduce overall poverty in 6%, inequality is reduced in 5.1%, transfer minus direct taxes reduce poverty by 1.5%. This means that social programs are accomplishing their goal, that is reducing poverty, while VAT taxes increases poverty in 3.6%. Transfer targets in low income like The PIP impacts high income, health services are neutral, and the education system in Grenada serves only to low income, except for tertiary education. This means university. Summing up, Grenada's fiscal interventions do reduce inequality and poverty, so they are well designed. Transfers are regressive, this means are helping poor people, and taxes are progressive, this means they are collecting more money from the rich people. And Grenada fiscal intervention have a redistributive effect, taking part of the high income, giving to the low part of the income distribution. Thank you so much. It was so fast, but it was only 5 minutes I have. I hope you understand. If you don't, please, you can read the article in the journal. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Guillermo, for tackling a difficult topic with clarity and with brevity. Who bears the burden of tax and benefits from the transfer? That was a critical question. And we got a resounding yes, that it is pro-poor and progressive in Grenada. So much kudos to the government for getting something right in terms of fiscal policy. I'd now like to turn to our next presenter, our fifth presenter, who is Diana DaSilva-Glasgow, and she will be speaking to the barriers to the integration of persons with disabilities in Guyana. Her co-authors are Dion Frank and Dwayne Edwards. Dr. DaSilva-Glasgow will be speaking. Dr. DaSilva-Glasgow is a senior lecturer in the Department of Economics and Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Guyana. Her research interests include Caribbean economic development and international trade policy. I'd now like to turn the floor over to our esteemed colleague, Dr. Diana.
Thank you, Dr. Nortova. At approximately 2.9% of the population in Guyana, persons with disabilities represent a sizable subgroup. And so in this research, we thought it very necessary to bring visibility to the challenges that this subgroup faces. So the objective of this study was really to try to identify the barriers that persons with disabilities face to participating in society, which is also very critical given the economic juncture at which the country finds itself, where we have had massive injection of fiscal resources through an expanding oil and gas sector. And that begs us to consider, how would that affect subgroups? How would that affect their ability to be able to participate in society to the same extent as other groups? We worked within the context of critical disability theory to try to identify the barriers that persons face and try to extrapolate the policy implications of those barriers in an evolving economy. There are three categories of barriers that we identified. Physical barriers, where we considered mobility, accessibility, and transport limitations that persons with disabilities may face with respect to both navigating their personal spaces as well as using public and private buildings. And then we looked at organizational barriers, the legislative and regulatory framework that is in place to ensure that persons with disabilities can access a range of public services. So here we were concerned about the framework in place, as well as the ability of persons with disabilities to be aware and to be able to benefit from public systems in place. And we considered attitudinal and behavioral barriers. And here we were looking at how society responds to persons with disabilities. What reactions do persons with disabilities get from the general public? How are they treated when they access basic services from professional and institutional bodies? Now, these were all latent constructs. And so we used survey data obtained from the National Commission for Disability. This survey that the National Commission for Disability has implemented or has undertaken is a house-to-house survey that is being done across essentially all of the administrative regions of Guyana, but to date, they have only completed 5 of the 10 administrative regions. And those 5 account for about 47% of the country's population. So we thought that this data set was ideal in that it captured an extensive portion of the population. In fact, we had about 9,000 observations falling within this data set. We also supported that with a key informant interview with the director of the National Commission for Disability. Now, I'll spend some time talking about the main findings. We were able to confirm that physical, attitudinal, and practice and organizational barriers are all challenges that persons with disabilities still face in Guyana. But within that umbrella, physical and organizational barriers were more significant. Now, with respect to physical barriers, 63% of the population faced accessibility challenges, which essentially pertains to challenges getting into buildings, navigating their own personal spaces, because those spaces are not sufficiently adapted to ensure that they afford or they allow for mobility of persons with physical constraints. And with respect to mobility, while there are systems and facilities in place to allow persons to access supportive devices, over 93% of the surveyed population still face mobility challenges where they're not able to have access to supportive devices. And with respect to transport, many persons with disabilities are using private transport. So there's clearly an absence of a public transport system. And while they're forced to use a private transport system, the cost is a significant barrier because many of them have to use taxis. These are not outfitted with wheelchair capacity, and so they bear the burden of that cost out of pocket. Now, notwithstanding that fact, it is important to point out that there is a fiscal system in place in Guyana to provide incentives for persons who are desirous of importing transport facilities that may allow them to be more mobile. Now, with respect to organizational barriers, over 90% of the surveyed population that we considered either had difficulty finding a support institution such as an academic organization that could accommodate persons with disabilities, or they were not part of any form of any sort of disability organization, which is very important because it means that they're not positioned to be able to obtain and benefit from information regarding disability support systems in place. And over 70% of them were only aware of just about 2 social support measures. And about 94% of them had only benefited from 2 social support measures. And there are several social support measures in place. Difficult circumstances program, public assistance program, but persons were not aware because they are not part of organizations that are empowering them to be aware of measures that are in place. Now, we found this research to be very important, given the juncture at which we find ourselves in Guyana. The barriers that persons face, the challenges that they have with respect to benefiting from social support systems mean that they can continue to be marginalized even as society advances, and they could continue to be entrapped in a vicious cycle of underdevelopment. So this research sought to really bring visibility to these challenges and to allow the challenges that persons face to be at the forefront and hopefully to be considered as part of the national development agenda of the country. So I encourage persons who may have an interest to read the article. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that very important contribution, especially in the context of the Sustainable Development Agenda and the overarching principle of leaving no one behind. So despite the fact that they're only 2.9% of the population, their life experiences and quality of life experiences matter. And you have very much highlighted the multidimensional barriers that they face, physical, organizational, attitudinal, and given us a brief snapshot of some of those challenges and where we're at now based on your mixed method study. So thank you so much for that wonderful synopsis of the issues related to disability barriers in Guyana. I now wish to turn to our 6th presenter, which is Audrey Allen and Owen Mackenzie, and they will introduce their article on Jamaica's public sector compensation review that was done in 2022, and they're looking at contextualizing workers' perception. Now, Dr. Allen is an industrial organizational psychologist from Walden University with research interests in emotional intelligence, leadership, and culture. And her co-author, Mr. Owen Mackenzie, is a proud graduate in our Master's of Development Studies program in Social Policy from SES at the University of the West Indies. He's also a co-founder of the It Takes a Village to Care Foundation. I now turn the floor over to our next presenters.
Thank you, Dr. Northover. Good morning, colleagues and audience. I will share my screen. All right, so as Dr. Northover mentioned, the title of our research study covers the Jamaica Public Sector Compensation Review 2022, Contextualizing Workers' Perceptions. And of course, we have our researchers, Dr. Marsh, myself, Owen McKenzie, and Janet Levy. Now, a little bit of background in relation to this study. Jamaica has been experiencing rapid economic recovery following the aftermath of the coronavirus in 2019. And so, in order to boost economic growth and development, the government sought to implement reforms that aim to reduce the cost of businesses, improve labor outcomes, heighten capital productivity, and increase resilience. And so it was envisioned that an overhaul of the compensation system would improve reward systems, boost productivity, and ensure that salaries were equitably distributed across jobs. Now, the central focus of this study was to analyze the public sector workers' perceptions of the compensation review and the extent to which they believe that the process was actually going to improve their earning potential and livelihoods. And we also sought to retrieve information from various categories of workers within the sector to just get a general idea of the perceptions that existed. The main objectives to identify whether or not participants believe that the public sector compensation review would make them better off. We also sought to identify whether participants were of the view that the review would offer enough information available and that the public sector compensation restructuring exercise was very informative in order for them to make a decision and feel better off. To assess whether or not the sector in relation to the review has the potential to increase motivation among public sector workers, and also to examine whether or not participants believe that the compensation exercise would save jobs within the public sector. Now, of course, we sought to have the relevant literature to support our study, and one research studies that we looked at was Gindling et al. 2020, and it spoke to several points within the study in relation to the fact that compensation and incentives given to persons employed in government institutions largely determine productivity, output, and service delivery. It also supported the fact that wages strongly influence personnel quality and motivation for those persons within the public sector. Participants, we had approximately 600 persons participate in the study, and the ages ranged from 18 to 56. The study employed a quantitative correlational approach to explore the extent to which two or more variables covary. We used a simple random sampling to recruit participants for the study, and the data was captured from online questionnaires administered using the SurveyMonkey software. Now I will hand over to my co-presenter, Owen McKenzie, who will take us through the remainder of the presentation.
Mr. McKenzie, are you there?
Yeah, I am here. Can you hear me, Dr. Northover?
Yes, we can hear you now. Please go
Okay,
ahead.
okay. The we use the chi-square statistical analysis to test 7 variables to determine the findings of the perception towards the public sector compensation review. And the independent variables were constant. Gender. So we look at making workers better off. We examine the sentiments, enough information, whether or not it would save jobs, and which is most important, which is most needed, and motivation. Okay, several of these hypotheses, 3 were correlational, and 4 were not. The correlational variables seeks to speak to the making workers better off. The other correlational variable that we see is the sentiments. Now, the sentiments was measured happy and unhappy. And then we had another correlational variables, the prioritized needs of the public sector workers. And we have a lot of variables there. And that was also correlational. And in the final findings, I mean, we look at the comparison between males and females, and we see that the 72.8%, well over half of the males compared to females, strongly disagreed that the public sector compensation restructuring exercise could motivate public sector workers. And the sentiments, we examined the sentiments, that figure was also high, 94 point some percent for males and 95 some 5% for the females. So the overall public sector workers had some concerns about the review, and they see the 9 very high, gender sentiment happy and happy. But overall, what we are seeing, what we can finally say for the research, is that the public sector workers are skeptics. They have some concerns about the whole entire restructuring program that was carried out by the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. And at that time, it was Dr. Nigel Clark, the Minister of Finance, but he's no longer with us. He's the Deputy Director at one of the multilateral institutions.
Thank you so much, Owen.
Okay.
Give you one few seconds to make your final point, conclusion.
My final point, based upon what we are seeing in terms of the results, I would want to think that there should be, before the review was done, I would want to see some awareness and sensitization towards the public sector as to what was going to happen with the review process, because a lot of public sector workers thought that they are going to get increase in salaries or wages, whatever the case may be. That's where they are with it. Because even after the review was completed, public sector workers were disappointed, and I was getting called and said that, look what the government did to us.
Thank you so much for that final overview. So I wish to thank our presenters with looking at the issues of whether or not workers feel that they're better off using a quantitative approach. And unfortunately, the conclusions is that they strongly disagree, that they're disappointed, and there's some level of skepticism in the system about the process. So our final presenter now will be Bhaskar Rao Shintal Pali, and he will introduce the article on biodiesel and bioethanol production in the Caribbean, the Jamaican case exploring the potential applications, or SERGOSM. His co-authors are Leneka Roden and Frederick Boyd. I turn over the floor to Dr. Sorry, hold on.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Good morning. Thank you, colleagues, friends, and my fellow researchers. Today, we explore how Caribbean can address its energy crisis by transforming the sargassum seaweed problem into sustainable biofuel solution with a specific focus on Jamaican potential. This work is conducted by myself, Dr. Rao, my student, Ms. Lenika Roden, and my colleague, Dr. Boyd, and part of our 2024 Social and Economic Studies journal. So regarding the Caribbean energy crisis, as we know, our standing point is the region's critical dependency on imported fossil fuels. Jamaica, for example, imports 91% of the oil. This creates a massive economic drain and leaves us vulnerable to global price shocks, resulting in some of the world's highest electricity costs, up to 36 cents USD per kilowatt, compared to the United States, almost 3 times less. This high cost and living stifles economic growth and also the development. Here you can see the renewable energy capacity. The overall assessment of the Caribbean landscape reveals the average renewable capacity. These figures represent the collective yet moderate commitment sustainable energy practices across regions. So coming to the third generation biofuels, moving beyond crops, the algae represents a sustainable leap forward. The key advantages here is no competition with food supply, thrives non-arable land and salt water, rapid growth rates, and year-round productivity we can see. So regarding the golden tide sargassum, now we turn a specific algae that has become a major issue. Sargassum, this is a golden tide, forms a massive belt across the Atlantic Ocean around 8,850 kilometers. When it washes ashore, it decays, releasing toxins that harm our tourism and ecosystem. But we propose a shift in perspective to see this nuisance as a tragic energy resource. Coming to the why sargassum is required, there are 3 important reasons: abundant biomass, dual benefits, and sustainable feedstock. As a third, a wild seaweed, it requires no fresh water and farmland. And regarding the production costs, there is something we have to find out, that oil import depends on carry cost. For example, if you see the Guyana and Trinidad, while the only countries where they import less percentage of oil compared to the Antigua, Barbudas, and Jamaica. So the process is having why we need seagrass. I mean, that means seaweed, sargassum, to convert into a bioethanol, which is a straightforward. It involves pre-treatment to prepare the biomass, hydrolysis to break down complex carbohydrates into simple sugars, and finally fermentation, while microbes convert these simple sugars into bioethanol production. And by seeing this biofuel potential, the oil content comparison, if you see, it's important to note that sargassum primary potential is for bioethanol, not for biodiesel. As this chart shows, its lipid content is low compared to other microbial microalgae. Its strength lies in sugars. It's a game-changing advantage is its massive, free, and readily available supply. Coming to the environmental and economic impact, the environmental benefit and profound are much more profound. Switching to local sargassum ethanol can cut greenhouse gases by 29% to 79.5% compared to the imported ethanol. The seaweed also acts as a carbon sink while growing and harvesting. It cleans our beaches and protects marine life. Coming to the economic benefits, there are economically, its initiative to a triple win. It reduces the strain on our foreign exchange reserves from fuel imports. It creates new blue economy jobs in harvesting and processing, and it directly protects tourism revenue by keeping our beaches clean. So this is our projected ethanol demand for the future, 2050, which is almost 1 billion liters. So we need to open our eyes. So conclusions, we can give something like, to seize this opportunity, we need to concerted effort. We need policy support to incentivize private investments. We need innovation using tools like CV trackers to manage the supply chain. And we need actions to move from planning to implementation for self-sufficient energy flow. Thank you for your time, friends. This research illustrates that by thinking creatively, we can tackle our environmental crisis and energy crisis simultaneously. I am now happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Shintapalli. Just wanted to say that Dr. Shintapalli, I forgot to introduce you. You're a senior lecturer at the University of the West Indies, so a fellow colleague in Jamaica here at Mona, and you hold a PhD in molecular plant physiology and plant biochemistry from the University of Hyderabad in India, with over 22 years of experience in teaching and research in plant biology and biotechnology, which we so ably saw here in your discussion on renewable energy potentials from sargassum in the case of the Caribbean, and whether or not we have the policy space to be able to take advantage of this potential triple win that will help us to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, increase our foreign exchange, and help to displace losses in foreign exchange from the impact that the invasion of the seaweed has on our tourism industry. So a very rich presentation from all our presenters. And I'd like to now open the floor for approximately 5 or 10 minutes of questions from the audience. Remember, you can put your questions in the chat or you can raise your hand. If there are no questions immediately, I'd like to ask Dr. Bhaskar, could you say if there are any examples of the application of the technology to transform sargassum into bioethanol within the region?
Yes, Professor. Actually, we have a project now from Foreign Commonwealth Development Organization, UK. I recently got last year that project, which is around something like 200,000 USD. The project costing. We are involved. My student, Miss Lenika Rodden, also involved in that project. Yes, we can do the sustainability by using the sargassum as a potential energy source for bioethanol production, because we are doing that project under grant of this FCDO. We found very fruitful results in this particular project, especially not only the bioethanol production we did, and also we have extracted the alginic acid that is very much important for agricultural applications as well.
Excellent, wonderful progress, very encouraging. I have a question in the chat from Owen McKenzie. He's asked, this is directed to you, Dr. Shintapalli. The question is, can you say how much it would cost to execute the sargassum project so that we could benefit? Which is speculative, but I'm not sure if we're at that stage yet, but that's the question.
Yeah, regarding this question, I see for biodiesel, instead of biodiesel, bioethanol production is much more vulnerable than biodiesel, because this sargassum, brown algae doesn't have much of oil, lipid contents compared to the carbohydrates. So we can able to utilize the sargassum for bioethanol production using the tremendous amount of carbohydrates rather than lipid content. what we never see in, not much seen in the sargassum. But if you go to the microalgae are vulnerable for lipid layer, more lipid content, though they are most useful for the biodiesel rather than bioethanol production. This is what my answer.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? I would also encourage presenters, if you found something provocative or interesting from your co-presenters and you wish to ask a question, please do.
And also I want to add one more answer for this one regarding the cost to execute the sargassum project. We are in some laboratory scale only, but we are doing some economic modeling for how to increase our project into next level to pilot scale and industrial scale. So let's see how it takes place in the future, next year, like that.
Thank you for that added comment. Any other queries? Okay, so
Dr. Northover,
yes.
Owen has a follow-up question.
Yes.
Do you think that the state would be interested in your project? This is for Dr. Wow. Do you think that the state would be interested in your project?
What state? I'm not getting, because I want to clear that cost to execute the sargassum project so that we can benefit. Yeah, both states.
Okay.
That means biodiesel and bioethanol production. I'm not getting exactly what Mackenzie is asking.
Thank you. Okay, we need a little bit more specificity to the question.
Yes.
But in the meantime, I'd like to, first of all, welcome our director, SES, Professor Lloyd Waller. He also would like to ask a question or make a comment. Prof, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dr. Northover. I'm just saying that further to Owen's question, I think all countries in the Caribbean are all countries that suffer from this challenge of sargassum would be interested in this solution, and if not just the countries, certainly the hotel sector, the hotel and tourist sector, the private sector itself would also be interested in this technology, because we have seen in the tourism space in the Caribbean, well, certainly Jamaica, that tourists have decided to go to other destinations because of the challenges surrounding sargassum and its impact on your skin and the toxicity that it causes, the awful smell on the beaches. So it's just not a kind of good product or representation of what you pay for as a tourist. So to answer your question, Owen, yes, the governments would certainly be interested in something like this, and the private sector would be interested in something like this. It would have been lovely for the next move, for the presenters to kind of meet with internally the product development and marketing and business development arms of the University of the West Indies, and perhaps even create a course around it, an assignment around it done by management studies, and work with them, and so the students also get to learn about the process of setting up a business, and try to create a kind of mechanism or instrument to engage the stakeholders, private sector, public sector, even international development partners. I know those who are into blue economy research would be Nature's Conservatory, for example, would certainly jump at an opportunity to engage this problem, because this is a long-term problem and it will not stop until we find some way to address it.
So adding to this, actually, this project we got a grant on two different methods. That is, one is acidic hydrolysis method and enzymatic hydrolysis method we want to perform. So we got some fruitful results in both acidic and enzymatic hydrolysis. Apart from this, we also extracted the alginic acid, which is much abundant in this brown algae, especially the sargassum. So that can be used for the agricultural applications as well, for different pest management control, like that. So
I would recommend you do a kind of proof of concept document, a small infomercial, more videos, more the video less than the more of info, a kind of video representation and less of a textual one or image one. But I would recommend that you do, go through the whole entire process, show the video, show the outcome, and then use that as a kind of value proposition to engage the different stakeholders about this as a solution. So I work with a marketing firm in terms of how to package it, work with a business development firm in terms of how to sell it. But certainly you have a fantastic solution there to a problem that has been, long term, and we need to move on it quickly before someone else reads your article and decides to productize it on your behalf for you.
Well, this is a wealth of research when it moves from pilot to being operationalized as a successful business and economic strategy. So these are very important connections being made here by Professor Willer, and I'm sure that he's willing to speak to yourself, Dr. Shintapali, on some of these possibilities after the presentation. And he's someone who is very accessible to put forward ideas with to translate towards the success of these initiatives. If there are no other questions or comments from the audience, Mary, about how much time do we have to allocate, or do we close?
If there are no further questions or comments, we can close, and we can do a vote of thanks as well before we close.
Okay, so this is the final call for your questions, comments, or concerns. Very rich and diverse set of contributions looking at challenges related to the experiences, but more so some of the positivity associated with the differences in our capacities to experience ourselves in the LGBT community. And certainly the importance of understanding the challenges related to disabilities and whether or not we are making good progress in terms of our public sector management and fiscal policy reforms. So if there are any other comments or questions? No? Okay. Stacey Marie Bennett, Monroe. Please open her mic, Richard.
All right, good morning. Sorry I asked the question. I was wondering if I should. I'm sorry. I wanted to ask Dr. Lewis. He had mentioned in his presentation that Protestant churches were downplaying the importance of, I guess, more Christian-based churches originating out of Africa. I wanted him to highlight that, to expand on that a little bit more for me.
Right. May I jump in, Dr. Northover?
Yes, please.
Yes. So what the scholars in the area have been looking at is the relationship between traditional African religions and their syncretized versions in Christianity. So we talk about the African independent churches. So what you have are, think about the Caribbean, and you do have a number of churches that are closer to African practices. So in Jamaica, perhaps revivalism, Maalism, and a similar discourse has come up in relation to, say, Obia. I mean, a slightly different nuance in regard to Obia, but the practices that are closest to Africa are typically practices that the more modern religious person wants to stay away from. So think about the kind of Pentecostal approach to the construct of Obia in Jamaica and the protests that we've been having silently and sometimes not so silently. It's a similar kind of attitude on the continent in relation to the independent African churches, which are kind of older than the newer evangelical type churches that have come and have taken root and have been domesticated. So the response is we are not those churches. We are different from them. We're also different from the European churches, the ones that where you have to spend 10 years to study to become a priest, and you can't become the kind of valuable person in your community in the way that you would want to be and as quickly as you'd want to be. Whereas with the evangelical Pentecostal charismatic movement, you become a pastor very quickly and you rise socially very quickly. So that's part of what the research has been showing. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you so much, Anthony. So I think we should, at this point, given the time, bring a closure to this very rich set of presenters. Remember, this is just a teaser, so we are asking you to get your copy of the volume, the SES volume, and to become a subscriber so that you don't miss out on all the rich research that is coming out of the University of the West Indies and our flagship journal. So I'd just like to, at this point, bring the proceedings to a close by giving a vote of thanks. First of all, to all of you, the audience, who made the time to engage with us on these important issues today, issues such as experiential dynamics of and challenges presented to the communities that belong to and I wanted to read this out, the two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and other sexual orientations and gender identities, or the two SLGBTQIA+ community. So it's expanding, which is the wealth of our differences are becoming recognized and valued. So we saw the work that was being done in this study, drawing on duoethnographic methods. We saw research on the same community using community mapping, and we saw research on issues related to the relationship between religion and anti-gay sentiments through critical discourse analysis. We learned about the many challenges that impact through cultures of power that act to make our lives in these communities precarious, and yet also we gain insight in the creative and the communal responses of the community to celebrate and thrive, as well as to advance the agenda for inclusive rights and justice. The challenges and barriers facing people with disabilities were also addressed in the Caribbean region, and this is very important as we move to better protect the rights of these persons in this community. Complementing this human and social justice concerns, we had the contributions that spoke to the distributional effects of fiscal policy in Grenada, workers' discontent with recent public sector compensation reviews in Jamaica, and how possibly we might turn biohazard and waste into economic benefit via the exploitation of Sargasso. So a very rich and diverse set of contributions. Special thanks to Mr. Richard Leach for the marketing and technical support, and to the team from the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation in Barbados for their support in live streaming on their social media platforms. None of this would have been possible without the ideas and scholarship of our SES volume contributors. So thank you all again for your insights and for participating in this process of research, dialogue, and communication. Finally, I wish to thank Mary for her sterling organizational efforts behind the scenes and for maintaining the quality of our SELISA's flagship Caribbean Journal for Multidisciplinary Studies on the Caribbean and Latin America. In this time of trauma and uncertainty, I wish each and every one of you special blessings and grace and security as we navigate the dangerous and yet exciting times of the 21st century. And while we still have many rivers to cross, as the late Jimmy Cliff would have said, may his soul rest in peace, we can be confident that within every crisis lies an opportunity for transformation. La luta continua. Peace and love be with you all.